Episode 1. My name is Harold Carter, and I am 74 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened to me on July 22nd, 1997. It was my third year working as a park ranger in Yellowstone National Park, and it changed my life forever. I love everything about being a park ranger. The towering trees that have stood sentinel for centuries, the diverse wildlife that roams freely through the vast wilderness, and those geysers that never fail to impress. It's my kind of paradise. Yellowstone has a raw, untamed beauty that never ceases to take my breath away. I spend a lot of time alone out here. Don't get me wrong, I see tourists all the time. It's talking with my fellow rangers that's scarce, but I don't mind. Solitude suits me, allowing me to immerse myself in the natural world around me. The whisper of wind through the pines, the distant call of an elk, the bubbling of hot springs. These are the sounds that fill my days sometimes, though I wish I had company out in the thick of the trails. The vastness of Yellowstone can be overwhelming, and there are moments when the isolation weighs heavily on me. Little did I know that on that fateful day in July, I would come to cherish those moments of solitude. The day this all started, I set out early. The air was crisp with the lingering chill of the night, but I knew it would warm up quickly. There had been reports of downed trees blocking one of the more popular hiking trails, and it was my job to clear the way. It was routine work, the kind that fills most of my days. I grabbed my gear axe, saw water bottles and a packed lunch, and headed into the woods. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds greeting the morning sun, and shafts of golden light pierced through the canopy, creating a dappled pattern on the forest floor. I found the first fallen tree. A little past noon, a big old pine had come right down across the path, its massive trunk creating an impassable barrier for hikers. I set my pack down and got to work. The rhythmic sound of my saw cutting through the quiet of the forest. It was hot and sweaty work despite the shade, so I took frequent water breaks. The physical labor was demanding, but there was something satisfying about it. With each cut, I was helping to maintain the trails that allowed others to experience the beauty of Yellowstone. As I worked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. The scent of fresh cut pine filled the air, mingling with the earthy smell of the forest. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves, providing momentary relief from the heat. I paused for a moment, wiping sweat from my brow, and took in the scenery around me, the towering trees, the patches of wildflowers, the distant call of a woodpecker. It was moments like these that reminded me why I loved my job so much. Little did I know that this sense of peace was about to be shattered in the most horrific way imaginable. The scream cut through the air like a knife, instantly chilling my blood. It was a woman's voice, high pitched and choked with terror. The sound seemed to come from deeper in the trees not too far from where I was working. I saw my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. Adrenaline surged through my body, making my vision tunnel. "Hello," I yelled, my voice echoing through the trees. "Can you hear me?" There was no answer, just an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Then another scream pierced the air, louder this time, and unmistakably closer. I took off running, pushing through the undergrowth branches, whipping at my face as I ran. "I'm coming," I shouted, hoping my voice would provide some comfort to whoever was in distress. "Hold on." I burst through a thick patch of bushes, and suddenly there she was, a young woman probably in her mid, with blonde hair matted with leaves and dirt. She was collapsed against a large boulder, her body shaking with sobs. As I approached, I saw that her hands were covered in blood. "Hey," I said, dropping to my knees beside her. "Are you all right? What happened?" She didn't speak, just pointed shakily further down the path. Her hands were trembling, covered in red, and I realized with a jolt that it wasn't her own blood following the direction of her frantic gestures. My stomach dropped. There, lying face down in the dirt about 20 feet away, was a body. "Stay here," I told the woman, my voice sounding surprisingly calm despite the panic rising in my chest. I approached the body cautiously, my eyes darting around the surrounding forest. Whatever had done this could still be nearby. The man I could see now. It was a man, was wearing a backpack with a bright green sleeping bag strapped to it, probably a hiker, like so many others, who came to explore Yellowstone's beauty. Now he lay motionless in the dirt, his body unnaturally still. "Sir," I called out, clinging to a desperate hope. "Are you all right?" Silence was my only answer. I knelt beside him, my hand shaking as I reached out to check for a pulse. I gently rolled him over, and that's when I saw, well, that's when I wished I hadn't. The man's chest was, there's no word for it, torn open is the closest I can get, but it doesn't begin to describe the horror of what I saw. It was as if something huge had clawed at him, ripping out his insides with savage fury. There was blood everywhere, and in bits of him I couldn't even identify. The forest floor was a canvas of gore painted in shades of red I never knew existed. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A bear attack. There had been a few sightings recently, but even as the thought formed, I knew this was something different, something worse rising. Episode 2. To my feet, my brain worked at full speed. The woman was clearly in shock. I had to get her out of here, and I needed to call for help, but how? My radio was back with my gear near the felled trees. Do I leave the woman to get it? What if whatever did this comes back? I was frozen with indecision when I heard it, a crunching sound of twigs and leaves from the woods behind us. I whipped around, my heart in my throat, expecting to see a bear, but what I saw instead would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I had ever seen before. The creature that emerged from the shadows of the forest was tall, too tall to be human, and it moved all wrong. It stood on 2 legs, yes, but it was hunched over, its posture a mockery of human stance. Its arms were impossibly long, dragging on the ground like some primordial ape. But it wasn't an ape. It wasn't anything that belonged in this world. The thing was covered in what at first glance looked like dark fur, but as it moved closer, I realized with growing horror that it was matted, hair long tangled and matted with what looked horribly like dried blood. The creature tilted its head as if curious, and I found myself staring into its face. Its eyes were small and deep-set in a face that was both human and not. The jaw was too wide, stretching across its face in a grotesque parody of a smile filled with long yellowing teeth. It snarled silently, and that's when I saw the blood on its hands, not hands, claws, long curved and wickedly sharp, still dripping with fresh blood. The woman behind me let out another scream, this one filled with pure, unadulterated terror. It broke the spell of horror that had frozen me in place. "Run!" I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. Run now, the creature lunged forward with frightening speed, but I was already moving. I bolted back the way I came, crashing through the underbrush with reckless abandon. It was a desperate sprint fueled by pure survival instinct. I could hear the woman's cries behind me, interspersed with those horrible snarls that seemed to grow closer with each passing second. My breath burned in my lungs and my legs threatened to give out. But I pushed on. Adrenaline gave me speed. I didn't know I possessed branches, whipped at my face, leaving stinging cuts. But I barely felt them. My entire world had narrowed down to this run or die. I burst into the clearing where I had left my tools, and I saw them, my radio and my axe. In that split second, I had to make a choice. I snatched up the axe just as the creature burst from the tree line. For a wild moment, I considered facing it, protecting the woman I'd now dragged into this nightmare. But it was a ridiculous notion. This thing wasn't an animal. It was something twisted, something wrong, and I wasn't a hero. Run towards the park entrance. I yelled at the woman, hoping she could hear me over the pounding of my own heart. Grabbing my radio, I followed my own advice and ran, my legs pumped furiously, my breaths coming in ragged, shallow gasps. I fumbled with the radio as I ran, calling desperately for backup. My voice was panicked, barely coherent, as I gave the ranger station the bare essentials of our location. Then the voice of Janice, the dispatcher, came through, telling me help was on the way, to hang tight. But hanging tight was the one thing I couldn't do. I could hear the snarls behind me closer with each passing second. Janice's voice crackled over the radio again, telling me helicopters and a team of rangers were inbound. They were minutes away, but minutes might as well have been years. The creature would be on me long before. Then I pushed myself harder, my lungs threatening to burst, my limbs on fire. Then I heard it. The woman screamed behind me, piercing and desperate. Then it cut off abruptly. A terrible silence fell over the forest. Dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Tears of frustration stung my eyes as I ran faster, branches whipping my face. I had to make it. I couldn't let that thing catch me. The trees began to thin out ahead. I could see a break in the foliage, an opening. And that's when I spotted it. The old Firewatch Tower. The Firewatch Tower loomed ahead, a rusted relic from a bygone era. It wasn't much, but it was my only hope. I scrambled towards it, my legs burning with the effort. I reached the base of the tower and grabbed the rusted ladder, cursing my trembling hands as I began to climb. The metal rungs were slick with moisture, making each step a potential disaster. But fear gave me strength, and I hauled myself up with desperate energy. The platform was only 20 feet up. Not much of a defense, but it was better than being on the ground. Gasping for air, I collapsed onto the wooden planks, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. After a moment, I risked a look back. The creature was there at the base of the tower, staring up at me with those terrible eyes. It snarled and pawed at the metal rungs, but it couldn't seem to figure out how to climb. The throbbing in my legs began to lessen. The pounding in my head started to subside. I clung to the railing for dear life, my knuckles white with the effort. That's when I heard it the most glorious sound I've ever known. Helicopters, the sound of rotor blades, filled the air, growing louder by the second. 3 helicopters appeared over the tree line, their powerful spotlights Piercing the dimming forest, my adrenaline spiked again. Not in fear, this time, but in the hope of rescue. I waved, my arms frantically trying to catch their attention. One of the helicopters descended, stirring up leaves and dust. Episode 3. With its powerful blades below, I saw Rangers spill out of the chopper. Men and women, I knew some of them, trained with firearms. They moved in a tactical formation, rifles raised, shouting for me to stay put. But my eyes were drawn to the trees the creature had vanished back into the shadows as if it had never been there. It felt like a lifetime before they managed to get me. Down from the tower, they lowered a harness, and I fumbled with the straps, my hands still shaking from the ordeal. When my feet finally touched solid ground, my legs turned to jelly and I nearly collapsed. 2 Rangers flanked me, their guns pointed outwards as we made our way. Back into the woods, we found the man's body first, the gruesome scene, just as I had left it. Then we found the woman, or what was left of her. The aftermath was horrific, far worse than the initial sight of the man's corpse. I can't put the details into words. That Rangers were hard men, weathered by the things they'd seen out here, but they blanched at the sight. One of them turned aside to vomit. There was no sign of the creature. It had vanished like a ghost through the evidence of its inhuman brutality was sickeningly real. The Rangers collected what was left of the woman's body, solemnly bagging the pieces. The man at least was easier to recover. I was spared. None of this, the ordeal not ending even. With my rescue that night, I found myself back at the ranger station giving my statement. It was a blur of meaning faces, offers of coffee and blankets. Concerned questions I answered, mechanically, still trapped inside my own head, replaying the day's events, the screams, the chase, and the sight of those things the monster had left behind. Janice, the dispatcher, whose voice had been a lifeline during my escape, pulled me aside. Her face was etched with concern, her eyes searching mine as if looking for something she hoped not to find. I know you're in shock, Harold, she said gently, but we need to talk about what you saw back there. That thing. The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. I described it as best I could. The hunched posture, the matted hair, the too wide jaw, and those damn eyes deep set and gleaming in the dark like an animal, yet with a chilling intelligence behind them. Janice listened, her face growing paler with each detail. They searched the woods the next day and the day after. That no sign of the creature, not a foot print, not a strand of hair. The park was shut down. Tourists turned away. A whole section of Yellowstone was cordoned off. They even brought in search dogs, but the creature was gone, swallowed up by the wilderness, as if it had never been there. The aftermath, well, let's just say it's been hell. Reporters swarmed like vultures, local ones at first, then national as the story made headlines. Beast of Yellowstone, they called it, stirring up a frenzy conspiracy theory. Theorists popped up raving about aliens or government experiments gone wrong. Some even accused me, saying I'd made it all up, or worse, that I was the monster. I was put on leave, of course, mandatory counseling sessions, psych evaluations, the whole 9 yards. They asked the same questions over and over. Could it have been a bear? Did I see it clearly? Was it possible I'd imagined the whole thing? Maybe it was the shock, the trauma, playing tricks on my mind. They kept searching the woods, finding nothing, and I could see the doubt lingering in their eyes. The worst part was I began to doubt myself too. There were no witnesses, no evidence of the thing, except for what it did to those poor people. The nights became a waking nightmare. I'd see the creature's face every time I closed my eyes, those gleaming eyes and yellow teeth, the blood on its claws. I'd see the woman, what was left of her, and hear her screams echoing in my head. Months passed, and the furor died down a little. There were no new attacks, no sightings of the creature. Life in the little tourist town near the park started to return to normal, but it wasn't normal for me. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched, that the thing was still out there waiting. I started checking over my shoulder every 2 minutes, jumping at any odd sound. The trees that once felt like home now seemed menacing, every shadow a potential hiding place for the monster. My fellow rangers tried to be supportive, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They'd smile and nod when I talked about the creature, but their expressions were those of people humoring someone they thought might be losing their grip on reality. It was isolating, to say that. At least a year after the incident, I quit the park service. I couldn't bear the sight of the forest anymore. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig sent my heart racing. The wilderness I once loved had become a source of constant terror. Moved away, trying to rebuild a life somewhere the woods weren't looming over me. I found a small apartment in a bustling city, surrounded by concrete and steel instead of trees and mountains. Some days I almost succeeded in convincing myself that what happened in Yellowstone was just a terrible nightmare. I told myself it was a rogue bear attack, a freak accident, amplified by trauma and fear. I forced myself to forget the creature's too human face, the calculating malevolence in its eyes. But then there were the reports. It started with whispers, rumors on the internet that I tried my best to ignore, but soon the stories were impossible to overlook. Not in Yellowstone. No, the attacks were happening hundreds of miles away, deep in other national forests. Episode 4, missing hikers, bodies torn apart, all bearing the same gruesome signature I had witnessed that day in the Yellowstone. People whispered the same. Name the beast. They didn't know the details. How could they? But I knew it was out there still. Hunting the news stories fueled my nightmares. I started carrying a gun, learned how to use it properly. Some nights I'd leave my blinds open, watching the shadows shift in the streetlights below, just in case the city that had once felt like a safe haven now seemed like a fragile illusion of security. Tried reaching out to my old colleagues at Yellowstone, but the response was always the same: polite dismissals, gentle suggestions that maybe I should talk to someone about what I'd been through. They didn't want to hear about the new attacks, didn't want to consider that what had happened that day might be part of something larger and more terrifying. The other rangers, well, we didn't talk about it, not directly, but sometimes at reunions I'd catch them watching me, their eyes filled with pity or something worse, like they thought I'd broken that. I was one step away from snapping, hunting a monster that may only exist inside my head. And maybe they were right. Maybe the trauma had warped my mind, made me see connections where there were none. But deep down, I knew the truth. The beast was real, and it was still out there. It's been nearly 3 decades since that day in Yellowstone, and I'm an old man now. The world has moved on, forgotten about the Beast of Yellowstone incident. It's become nothing more than a local legend, a story to scare tourists around, campfires. But I haven't forgotten. I can't forget. I've spent years researching, gathering every scrap of information I could find about similar attacks. I've plotted them on maps, looking for patterns, trying to understand the creature's movements, and slowly a picture has emerged. It's not just one beast. There are more of them out there, hidden in the wild places of the world. They're smart, they're careful, and they're patient. They strike rarely, but when they do, it's with the terrifying brutality. I've tried to warn people to get the authorities to take it seriously, but who's going to listen to an old man rambling about monsters in the woods? I'm just another crackpot, another conspiracy theorist to be ignored or pied, but I know the truth, and that's why I'm writing this now, putting my story down in the hope that someday someone will believe, someone will understand the danger that's out there, lurking in the shadows of our wilderness. To whoever reads this, be careful out there. The woods are beautiful, but they hide secrets, dark, terrible secrets, and sometimes those secrets have teeth and claws. My name is Harold Carter. I'm 74 years old, and this is my warning to the world. My name is Richard Lewis, and I am 65 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened to me in September of 2010, but the memory of it is as fresh as if it were yesterday. I've been a park ranger in Yellowstone National Park for 15 years now, married with 2 kids, a dog. The whole suburban bliss situation, tucked into a corner of this wild place. You'd think I got used to it, to the scale of the wilderness and the secrets it holds. But the truth is, you never quite do that. Particular day started like most others. I woke up at dawn, kissed my wife Sarah goodbye, and headed out for my routine patrols through my assigned section of the park. The air was crisp with the first hints of autumn, and the early morning mist was just starting to lift from the valleys. My job was to check for illegal campers, make sure those trail permits were in order, and generally keep an eye on things. Yellowstone's a tourist magnet, but we tread to keep things as controlled as possible. I was nearing one of the more remote offshoots of the Pelican Valley when I spotted it, a carcass a good few hundred feet off the trail, half obscured by bushes from the size. I guessed it was an elk. I frowned in annoyance, thinking of the paperwork if it turned out to be a poaching case. With a sigh, I radioed in my location and made my way towards it. Wolves were a possibility too. Of course, it would be good to know which for the sake of the visitors. But as I got closer, I saw the first sign that something was very, very wrong. There was no blood around the carcass, not a drop. I stopped in my tracks, a chill creeping up my spine. I'm no greenhorn. I've seen my share of predator kills, and this made no sense. The closer I got, the worse it became. The elk's bones were picked absolutely clean. No trace of meat nor any sign of gnawing. It looked surgical. Somehow it made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end, and then I caught a whiff of the rotten stench clinging to the remains. I gagged, my stomach churning. It wasn't the natural decay of carrying it. Had a sickening sweetness to it, mixed with something metallic. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. I turned to go when something massive exploded from the bushes behind me. I staggered from the impact, barely managing to avoid its lunge. I whipped around, my gun already in my hand, to see the thing. It was like nothing I'd ever encountered before it stood on 2 legs, easily twice my height, its body lean and muscled in a way that was wrong skin, stretched tight over bulging sinew, a sickly grey colour. The head, disproportionately small at top, its broad shoulders had a skull-like appearance and jaws that dripped with drool. Its eyes were milky white. No pupils, just empty orbs that seemed to, episode 5, stare right through me. Panic shot. Through me hot and blinding, I fired off. A shot more out of instinct than anything else. The creature flinched back, making a hissing sound that made my teeth rattle. The second shot went wild, and then I was running like my life depended on it, because it did. I heard it pounding after me. The trees, whipping by in a blur. At one point, its claws tore through my jacket, leaving burning gash on my back. I stumbled and the world tilted crazily, but I managed to keep myself upright. I finally burst through the tree line and onto the trail. A family out on a hike watched, open-mouthed, as I sprinted by the creature hot on my heels. I screamed at them to run. They reacted a moment too. Late, the dad tried to put himself between his family and the thing, but it swiped him aside with ridiculous ease. His body crashed into a tree. I heard his wife scream. I kept running. Shots cracked. Behind me, the creature roared and abruptly changed course. I looked back, just in time to see it lunge for one of the park cops, the ones frantically responding to my mayday call. They barely had time to register what was happening before the creature was on them, and then it was a maelstrom of blood and screams and gunfire. I ran until my lungs threatened to burst. I ran until the sounds of carnage behind me faded, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Eventually, I found a fallen log half hidden by ferns and crouched there, gasping for breath. The trembling wouldn't stop for a long time. All I could do was try not to throw up and wait for rescue. I don't remember much of the next few hours. There was a helicopter, a field medic, and a whole lot of confused questions. I was in shock. The thing I saw, it shouldn't have been possible. Nobody believed my description. Of course, predator, attack. They kept saying maybe even a rogue grizzly. The incident made national news. 4 dead, a horrifying creature sighted by a hysterical ranger. In the end, it was dismissed as post-traumatic hallucinations I was forced to undergo. Psych evaluations put on temporary leave. All the while having nightmares about those empty eyes and razor-sharp claws. My family bore the brunt of it. The whispers when we went to the supermarket, the flinches whenever my kids made too much noise. My wife Sarah stood by me, fierce as a mama bear protecting her cubs, but I could see the stress in her eyes, the strain on our marriage. One night I woke up screaming, my heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my ribs. Sarah was by my side in an instant, soothing words spilling from her mouth, even as she switched on the bedside lamp. And in the soft light, I noticed it, a thin, glistening trail of mucus on the pillow and a strange, acrid smell clinging to my skin. I spent the rest of that night in this shower scrubbing myself raw, trying to wash away the feeling of wrongness. In the morning, pretending to be fine, pretending not to notice Sarah's worried glances. I dug through my gear, found my old hunting rifle, the one Grandpa taught me to shoot with back when I was just a kid. It felt heavy in my trembling hands. No way, I was letting it come for my family too. My resignation letter was the most difficult thing I ever wrote. Sarah didn't try to stop me, just held me tight and whispered, "Be careful then," with a last kiss for her and the kids. I got in my truck and drove back to Yellowstone. I found my way to that clearing near Pelican Valley, the place where it all began. The stench nearly made me lose my breakfast all over again. I steeled myself, the rifle held steady, and followed the putrid trail deeper into the woods. For a long time it was like chasing shadows, half heard noises, glimpses of Mantle Grave disappearing behind the trees. Then I found another carcass, this one, a deer picked clean, the same way as the elk. My rage exploded, grief fueling its fire. They should have believed me. They should have done something. I pushed forward, my movements growing less measured. The forest seemed to watch with an ancient sort of malice, the air charged with a crackling intensity that set my teeth on edge. I had no doubt I was the one being hunted now and then, that there it was, lounging in a clearing, the light filtering through the leaves, casting strange patterns on its grotesque hide. The rage bubbled over the thing, lifted its skull like head, its nostrils quivering before it could react. I aimed and fired. The roar of the rifle echoed, followed by a shriek of pain. The creature staggered, blood spraying the grass. It looked at me, those horrible eyes wide. Surprise flickered across them, maybe even fear. For a moment, the impossible dared to feel possible, and then it charged. My second shot missed. My third lodged itself in its shoulder, slowing it just enough. I flung the rifle away and sprinted back towards the trees, the creature's enraged bellows filling the air behind me. I scrambled up a gnarled old tree. I was high enough to see over the undergrowth when the creature finally came crashing into the clearing. It circled the base of the trunk, frustrated growls rumbling from its depths. My heart beat so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, me perched precariously in a tree, the monster below, neither of us willing to give an inch. As the light began to fade, the creature turned its empty eyes up towards me, and I felt the first trickle of despair. It wasn't going to leave. I was going to die up here, alone and forgotten. But then a glimmer of movement in the distance caught my eye. A pack of wolves, episode 6, at least 6, strong, slinking silently through the underbrush. They zeroed in on the creature. Something ancient flared in its expression. Then a primal understanding passing between them, it turned, and with a last look in my direction loped off into the gathering darkness. The wolves watched it go, and then without a backward glance disappeared back into the twilight. I didn't move for a long time, every muscle screaming in protest. Finally, with shaking legs, I climbed down. My journey back to my truck was a blur. Every rustle of leaves had me flinching, my hands slick with cold sweat. When I finally got home, Sarah just held me. No questions, just understanding, and the scent of her familiar perfume washing over me. The nightmares lessened after that, fading into a dull, constant dread that was almost manageable. The resignation and relief wed within me. Park rangers are called to protect, but on some days that means protecting the public from monsters that aren't supposed to exist, and sometimes it means protecting the monsters from us. I never went back to my section of the park. Something safer, something that didn't leave me haunted by empty white eyes and the sweet metallic stench of death not. Many can understand the aftermath. My scars run deep, seen clearly only by my wife and those who share a bond forged in the heart of Yellowstone's secrets. They say time heals all wounds. They're wrong. Some wounds mark you for life, reminders that the world is wilder and far more terrible than we dare imagine. As I sit here years later, I can't help but wonder, is it still out there, that unnatural predator? And if it is, will be the next to stumble upon its hunting grounds. All I know is that the wilderness holds secrets, and some of them have teeth. I've always been a city person. The constant hum of traffic, the smell of coffee shops on every corner, and the rhythmic tapping of my keyboard as I worked on design projects. That was my life in New Orleans. But in the summer of 2015, at the age of 28, I found myself craving something different, something that would shake up my routine and give me a break from the endless cycle of client meetings and deadlines. That's when my buddy Travis came to me with an idea. "Rich," he said, leaning back in his chair at our favorite coffee shop, "how about we volunteer at a summer camp? It's in the Ozarks, right in the heart of nature. No computers, no clients, just fresh air and annoying kids." He grinned, showing he was only half serious about the annoying part. I raised an eyebrow. "A summer camp, Travis? I barely know how to talk to kids, let alone entertain them for a week." He waved off my concern. "Don't worry about it. I did it last year, and it was a blast. Plus, Maya's coming too. She's great with kids. Being a teacher, and all between the three of us, we'll manage just fine." I molded over, sipping my now lukewarm coffee. The idea of spending a week in nature, away from the constant notifications and email, was starting to grow on me. "Where exactly is this camp?" I asked, my interest piqued. "It's in Arkansas, near the Buffalo National River. Beautiful area, lots of hiking trails, a big lake for swimming." "Come on, Rich. When's the last time you did something spontaneous?" He had me there. My life had fallen into a predictable pattern, and the thought of breaking out of it was enticing. "All right," I said finally, "I'm in. But if I end up covered in poison ivy, chased by a bear, I'm blaming you." Travis laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. "Trust me, it'll be great. We leave next week. I'll send you the details." As I walked home that evening, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. Little did I know that this decision would lead me into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. The week flew by in a flurry of preparation. I tied up loose ends with my clients, packed a bag full of clothes I hoped would be suitable for outdoor activities, and even bought a new pair of hiking boots. Before I knew it, I was squeezed into the back of Travis's beat-up Jeep with Maya in the passenger seat and Travis behind the wheel, heading north towards Arkansas. The drive took us through Louisiana and into Arkansas, the landscape gradually changing from flat bayous to rolling hills, and finally to the rugged beauty of the Ozarks. As we wound our way through the mountains, I found myself captivated by the lush green forests and the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves. "Almost there," Travis announced as we turned onto a narrow gravel road. "Camp, Whispering Pines. Here we come." The road twisted and turned through the dense forest for what felt like miles before finally opening up to reveal a clearing. And there it was, Camp Whispering Pines, looking like something straight out of a postcard. A large, Wooden sign welcomed us, the paint, slightly faded but still cheerful beyond. I could see a cluster of log cabins surrounding a central area with picnic tables and a large fire pit to the left. A pristine lake sparkled in the afternoon sun, a small dock jutting out into the water. As we pulled up to the main office, a man emerged from the building. He was older, probably in his late 60s, with a kind face etched with laugh lines and a full head of silver hair. He walked with a slight limp, but his handshake was firm as he greeted us. "Welcome to Camp Whispering Pines," he said, warmly. "I'm Robert Caldwell, the camp director. You must be our new volunteers." We introduced ourselves and Mr. Caldwell gave us a quick tour of the camp. The main area consisted of several cabins for the campers, a larger cabin for Episode 7, the staff, a mess hall, and various activity areas. The whole place had a rustic, love feel to it. "We're so glad to have you here," Mr. Caldwell said. "As we finish the tour, the campers will be arriving tomorrow morning, so you have the evening to settle in and get familiar with the place. Dinners at 6:00 in the mess hall." Any questions? We shook our heads, still taking in our surroundings as Mr. Caldwell walked away. I couldn't help but notice how his eyes darted towards the tree line, a fleeting expression of, was it worry? But before I could dwell on it, Travis was already dragging me towards our cabin, excited to start our adventure that evening. As we sat around the campfire with the other staff members, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The crackling of the fire, the chirping of crickets, and the soft lapping of the lake against the shore created a soothing symphony for the quiet. First time in months, I wasn't thinking about deadlines or client revisions. I was simply present, enjoying the company and the beauty of nature around us. Little did I know that this tranquility was merely the calm before the storm in the days to come. The peaceful facade of Camp Whispering Pines would be shattered, revealing a darkness that had been lurking just beneath the surface all along. As I drifted off to sleep that night in my narrow bunk bed, the soft whisper of wind through the pines outside our cabin window, I had no idea of the horrors that awaited us, no idea that in just a few short days, this idyllic summer camp would become the setting for a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. The next morning, dawn bright and clear, the sun peeking through the curtains and rousing me from a deep sleep. For a moment I was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings throwing me off. Then I remembered I was at Camp Whispering Pines, about to start a week of volunteering. I climbed out of bed, careful not to wake Travis, who was still snoring softly in the bunk above me. Outside, I could hear the bustling sounds of the camp coming to life, the clanging of pots and pans from the mess hall, the slam of car doors as the other counselors arrived, and the distant call of birds in the forest after a quick shower in the communal bathhouse. Experience I was not quite prepared for. I made my way to the mess hall. The smell of bacon and coffee drew me in, my stomach growling in anticipation. Maya was already there, sitting at one of the long wooden tables. With a mug of coffee in her hands, she smiled as I approached, pushing a plate of bacon and eggs towards me. "Morning, Rich," she said. "Sleep well." I nodded, taking a grateful sip of the coffee she poured for me like a log. "It's so quiet out here compared to the city." "I know, right?" Maya's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I can't wait for the kids to arrive. It's going to be so much fun. I smiled at her, enthusiasm, though internally I was still nervous about interacting with the campers. I'd never been particularly good, with kids always unsure of how to talk to them or what activities they'd enjoy. As if reading my thoughts, Maya reached out and patted my hand. "Don't worry, Rich. You'll do great. Just be yourself and the kids will love you." Before I could respond, the mess hall door burst open and Mr. Caldwell strode in, his limp barely noticeable in his excitement. "Good morning, everyone," he called out, his voice booming through the room. "The buses will be arriving in about an hour. Let's make sure everything's ready for our campers." The next hour was a whirlwind of activity. We helped set up welcome signs, prepared name tags, and did one final sweep of the cabins to ensure everything was in order. As we worked, I couldn't help but notice how Mr. Caldwell seemed to be everywhere at once, checking and double-checking every detail. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found my own excitement growing. Finally, the distant rumble of buses could be heard. We all gathered near the camp entrance, watching as 3 yellow school buses wound their way up the gravel road. As they pulled to a stop, the doors opened, and a flood of children poured out there. Excited chatter filling the air. For the next few hours, it was controlled chaos as we helped the kids find their cabins, get settled in, and start to explore the camp. I was assigned to a group of 12-year-old boys, and to my surprise, I found myself enjoying their energy and curiosity. One boy in particular caught my attention. His name was Ethan, a quiet kid with glasses who seemed more interested in the plants and insects around the camp than in rough housing. With the other boys, I made a mental note to keep an eye on him to make sure he didn't feel left out. As the day progressed, we moved through a series of activities designed to help the kids get to know each other and become familiar with the camp. We played name games, had a scavenger hunt around the grounds, and ended the day with a campfire and s'mores. Sitting around the fire that night, watching the flames dance and listening to the kids laugh and chat, I felt a sense of contentment. Maybe Travis had been right. Maybe this was exactly what I needed. But as I glanced around the circle, my eyes caught Mr. Caldwell's. He was standing at the edge of the fur light, his face half in shadow, and in that moment I saw something in his expression that sent a chill down my spine. It was a look of fear, quickly masked. As he noticed my gaze, I shook my head, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling. I was probably just tired from the long day, seeing things that weren't there. But as I lay in bed that night, Episode 8, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest, I couldn't quite shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right at Camp Whispering Pines. The next few days fell into a routine. We'd wake up early, have breakfast in the mess hall, and then lead the kids through various activities, hiking, swimming, arts, and craft sports. The days were long and tiring, but there was something rewarding about seeing the kids' faces light up as they learned new skills or conquered their fears. Ethan, the quiet boy from my group, continued to intrigue me, while the other boys were always eager for the more active pursuits. Ethan seemed happiest during our nature walks, pointing out different plants and insects with a knowledge that surprised me. On the 4th day of camp, I decided to talk to him during our afternoon free time. I found him sitting by the lake, sketching in a notebook. "Hey, Ethan," I said, Sitting down next to him, "What are you?" Drawing, he looked up, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Oh, hi, Mr. Richard. I'm drawing the dragonflies. Did you know there are over 5,000 species of dragonflies in the world?" I smiled, impressed by his knowledge. "I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. You seem to know a lot about nature." Ethan nodded, his eyes lighting up. "I love learning about animals and plants. My dad's a biologist, so he teaches me a lot." We chatted for a while about the different plants and animals around the camp. As we talked, I noticed Ethan becoming more animated, his usual shyness fading away. "Mr. Richard," he said suddenly, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I replied, curious about his sudden change in demeanor. Ethan glanced around as if making sure no one else was listening. "Do you know about the disappearances?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Disappearances? What do you mean?" I overheard some of the older kids talking. Ethan said, his voice still low. "They said that a long time ago. Some kids went missing from this camp. Is that true?" For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I hadn't heard anything about disappearances, and I was sure it was just a camp ghost story. But the seriousness in Ethan's eyes made me pause. "I'm not sure, Ethan," I said finally. "Sometimes people like to make up scary stories about places like this, but I can assure you, you're safe here. We're all looking out for you kids." Ethan nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced before I could say anything else. The sound of the dinner bell echoed across the camp. "Come on," I said, standing up and offering him a hand. "Let's go get some food. I hear it's pizza night." As we walked back to the mess hall, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling Ethan's question had stirred up. It was probably nothing, just a camp legend, but I made a mental note to ask Travis about it later that night as we gathered around the campfire for our nightly storytelling session. I noticed Mr. Caldwell seemed more on edge than usual. His eyes kept darting to the tree line, and he flinched at every unexpected sound from the forest. When it was his turn to tell a story, he cleared his throat nervously. "How about I tell you all about the history of Camp Whispering Pines?" he suggested, his voice a little shaky. The kids groaned clearly, hoping for something scarier, but Mr. Caldwell pressed on. He talked about how the camp had been founded in the 1950s, how it had weathered storms and droughts, how generations of children had passed through its gates. But as he spoke, I couldn't help but notice what he wasn't saying. There was no mention of any troubles, any dark periods in the camp's history. It felt like he was skirting around something, carefully avoiding certain topics after the kids had been sent to bed. I pulled Travis and Maya aside. "Hey, have either of you heard anything about disappearances at this camp?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Travis's eyebrows shot up. "Disappearances? No, nothing like that. Why do you ask?" I explained my conversation with Ethan. Maya frowned, her forehead creasing with concern. "That's odd," she said. "I haven't heard anything either, but I don't know. Something feels off about this place. Sometimes, have you noticed how Mr. Caldwell gets all jumpy when it gets dark?" Travis shrugged. "He's an old guy and the woods probably just get spooked easily. Look, I'm sure it's nothing, just some camp legend that gets passed around to scare the newbies." I nodded, wanting to believe him, but as I lay in bed that night, listening to the wind whisper through the trees outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing. Something important, something dangerous. Little did I know our peaceful week at Camp Whispering Pines was about to take a dark turn, plunging us into a nightmare none of us could have imagined. The next morning dawned grey and overcast, a stark contrast to the sunny days we'd had so far. A chill hung in the air, and a light mist clung to the ground, giving the camp an eerie, otherworldly feel. As I made my way to the mess hall for breakfast, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over me. The camp felt different. Somehow, the usual morning chatter of birds conspicuously absent inside the mess hall. The atmosphere was subdued. The kids, usually boisterous and full of energy in the mornings, were quieter than usual, huddled in small groups and speaking in hushed tones. I spotted Ethan sitting alone at one of the tables, pushing his scrambled eggs around his plate without eating. I grabbed my own breakfast and sat down across from him. "Morning, Ethan," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Everything. Episode 9. Okay." He looked up at me, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "Mr. Richard," he whispered, "I had a bad dream last night." I leaned in, concerned. "What kind of dream?" Ethan glanced around nervously before continuing. "I dreamed about the missing kids. They were in the woods calling for help, but no one could hear them. And there was something else out there, something bad." A chill ran down my spine, but I forced a reassuring smile. "It was just a dream, Ethan, probably because of our conversation yesterday. Try not to worry about it." "Okay," he nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Before I could say anything else, Mr. Caldwell's voice boomed through the mess. "Hall attention, everyone. Due to the weather, we're going to have to change our plans for today. Instead of the hike, we'll be doing indoor activities this morning. Counselors, please see me after breakfast for details." A collective groan went up from the kids, but I felt a sense of relief. Something about the idea of going into the misty woods today made me uneasy. After breakfast, I joined the other counselors gathered around Mr. Caldwell. Up close, I could see the dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept well. His hand shook slightly as he handed out the day's revised schedule. "Everything all right, Mr. Caldwell?" I asked. Quietly, as the others dispersed, he started as if he'd forgotten I was there. "Oh, yes, just didn't sleep well. The wind, you know." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Better get to your group, Richard. Lots to do today." I nodded and turned away, but not before I saw his smile falter, replaced by a look of it fear, guilt. I couldn't quite place it, but it made my stomach churn. The morning passed slowly. We kept the kids occupied with board games, arts and crafts, and impromptu talent shows, but there was an underlying tension that wouldn't dissipate. Every now and then, I'd catch one of the kids staring out the window at the misty woods, a strange expression on their face. By lunchtime, the weather had cleared somewhat, and Mr. Caldwell announced that we could resume outdoor activities for the afternoon. The kids cheered, eager to get outside after being cooped up all morning. We decided to take the kids down to the lake for some swimming and canoeing. As we made our way down the path, I found myself walking next to Ethan. Feeling better, I asked him. He shrugged. "I guess, Mr. Richard, do you ever feel like you're being watched?" I was about to respond when a scream cut through the air. It came from up ahead, where the path opened up to the lake shore. I broke into a run, my heart pounding. I burst through the trees to find Maya standing at the edge of the water, her face pale. The other kids were clustered around her, their eyes wide with fear. "Maya, what's wrong?" I panted. Skidding to a stop beside her, she pointed wordlessly at something floating in the water. At first, I couldn't make out what it was. Then the wind shifted, turning it slightly, and I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a shoe, child's shoe, bobbing gently in the waves. Is that? I couldn't finish the sentence. Maya nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's Lily, the girl from cabin 3. I turned to the group of kids behind us. "Has anyone seen Lily today?" They shook their heads, fear evident in their eyes. I did a quick head count and felt my stomach drop. We were one kid short. "Okay, everyone stay calm," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maya, take the kids back to the main camp and alert Mr. Caldwell. I'm going to look around." Here, as Maya ushered the frightened children back up the path I waded into the water to retrieve the shoe. It was a small sneaker decorated with cartoon characters, definitely LLY. I searched the shoreline calling Lily's name, but there was no response. The mist had started to roll in again, making it hard to see more than a few feet in any direction. As I peered into the gloom, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching me. A twig snapped behind me, and I whirled around, my heart in my throat. But it was just Travis looking as scared. As I felt Maya told me what happened, he said, his voice low. "Any sign of her?" I shook my head. "Nothing but the shoe." "Travis, what the hell is going on here?" He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around nervously. "I don't know, man, but I've been doing some digging. You remember what Ethan said about the disappearances? It's true, back in the 70s, 3 kids went missing from this camp. They were never found." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I only just found out. I overheard some of the older staff talking about it. They tried to keep it quiet, said it was bad for business. But get this, the camp closed down for a few years after it happened, and guess who reopened it? Mr. Caldwell. I breathed the pieces, starting to fall into place. Travis nodded grimly. He was a counselor here when the kids disappeared, took over the place a few years later. I was about to respond when a shout came from the direction of the camp. We exchanged a look and took off. Running, we arrived back at the main camp to find chaos. Kids were crying. Counselors were running back and forth. And in the middle of it all stood Mr. Caldwell, looking older and more haggard than ever. "What's going on?" I demanded as we approached. Mr. Caldwell turned to us, his face ashing. "It's not just Lily," he said, his voice barely audible. "2 more kids are missing, Ethan and Jake." My blood ran cold at the mention of Ethan's name. I thought of our conversation at breakfast, his talk of bad dreams, and episode 10, feeling watched. Had he known something was going to happen? "We need to call the police," I said firmly. Mr. Caldwell shook his head. "No signal up here, the line's dead too. I've sent 2 of the staff to drive into town for help, but it'll take them at least an hour to get there. Then we need to organize a search," Party TRA said. "We can't just sit here and do nothing." Mr. Caldwell nodded wearily. Yes, you're right. But we need to be careful. The woods, they're not safe." I caught Travis's eye, seeing my own fear and suspicion reflected there. What did Mr. Caldwell know that he wasn't telling us? As we began to organize the search, Parties. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being drawn into something dark and ancient. The mist continued to thicken around us, and in the distance, I could have sworn I heard the sound of childish laughter quickly swallowed by the oppressive silence of the forest. Whatever was happening at Camp Whispering Pines, I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning as I grabbed a flashlight and prepared to head into the woods. I silently prayed that we weren't already too late. The search parties were organized quickly, with a mix of counselors and older campers paired up to cover more ground. Mr. Caldwell insisted that no one go alone, his eyes wilded with a fear that seemed to go beyond just concern for the missing children I was paired with. Travis, which gave me some comfort as we set off into the woods, the mist swirling around our ankles. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. What do you think is really going on? Here I whispered to Travis as we picked our way through the underbrush. He shook his head, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. I don't know, man, but something not right the way Caldwell's acting these disappearances. It's like history repeating itself. We called out for the missing kids as we walked, our voices echoing strangely in the mist-shrouded forest. The trees seemed to loom over us, their branches reaching out like gnaw fingers. My name is Robert Johnson, and I'm 66 years old. This happened to me back in the summer of 2005. I was 23, fresh out of college and in desperate need of a break from the relentless grind of academia. I had this idea that working at a summer camp would be the perfect way to unwind, so I signed up to be a counselor at Camp Willow Creek in Montana. It sounded idyllic, rolling hills crystal clear, lakes and no cell service to remind me of the thesis still waiting on my laptop. Camp Willow Creek was one of those old school places where kids learned how to fish, build campfires, and make friends outside of a screen. It had been around since the 60s and had the charm to match with creaky wooden cabins and a main lodge that always smelled like pine and campfire smoke. There were about 15 of us counselors, a mix of college kids like me and a few high schoolers. I remember the first day vividly. The sun was high and I was joking around with Todd, another counselor who became my fast friend. Todd was a stocky guy with a permanent tan and a laugh that could scare away a bear. We were unpacking supplies in the main lodge when we met our head counselor, Eleanor. She was in her early 40s with the kind of nonsense attitude that told you she'd seen it all. Elana gave us the rundown of our duties and warned us about the wildlife. We all laughed, thinking she meant raccoons or the occasional bear. Little did we know the true dangers lurking in those woods were far more sinister than any wild animal. The first few weeks were uneventful. We LED hikes, organized swimming competitions and told ghost stories around the campfire. The kids loved it, and so did we. There was something pure about the place, a kind of untouched beauty that made you forget the outside world existed. But then things started to change. It was mid-July when I first noticed something odd. We were preparing for a big overnight camping trip up by Eagle Point, a popular spot about a mile hike from the main camp. That afternoon, I saw Ella talking to a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, with a scraggly beard and clothes that looked like they hadn't seen a washing machine in months. He seemed agitated, waving his hands and pointing towards the woods. Eleanor's face was set in a hard line, her lips Moving rapidly as she spoke to him, I walked over to Todd, who was organizing the tents, and nodded towards the scene. You know who that is? Todd looked up, squinting against the sun. No idea, but he doesn't look too happy, does he? We watched as the man finally turned and stomped away, disappearing into the trees. Elena stood there for a moment, rubbing her temples before heading back towards us. When she reached us, her expression had softened, but I could still see the tension around her eyes. Who was that? I asked, trying to sound casual. Just a local, she replied, her voice clipped. Nothing to worry about now. Are you guys ready for tonight? I wanted to press further, but Eleanor's tone made it clear. The conversation was over. That night we hiked up to Eagle Point with the kids, setting up camp as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky turned a brilliant shade of orange, casting long shadows. Across the clearing, we built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and told ghost stories, the usual camp fare, but something felt off. I couldn't shake the image of that man and the way he had looked at Eleanor around midnight. The kids were finally asleep in their tents, and the other counselors and I sat around the dying fire Todd was poking at. The episode 11, Embers with a stick his face, thoughtful. You think there's more to that guy than Eleanor's letting on? He asked, echoing my thoughts. I shrugged. Probably just some crazy local, you know, how it is out here. Todd nodded, but neither of us looked convinced. We decided to keep watch, taking turns to ensure everything stayed quiet. My shift was the last from 3 to 5:00 a.m. The woods were eerily silent, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. I sat by the fire, staring into the darkness, my mind playing tricks on me. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig had me on edge. Just as the sky began to light, I heard it, a faint sound like footsteps. I stood up, straining to see through the trees there. Just at the edge of the clearing, I saw a figure. It was the man from earlier, standing perfectly still, watching us. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly reached for my flashlight, keeping my eyes on him. But when I flicked it on, he was gone, just vanished into the trees. I didn't mention the encounter to Eleanor the next day, partly because I didn't want to alarm the kids, and partly because I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. The rest of the week passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I went into the woods, I felt eyes on me. Then, about a week later, one of the kids, a quiet boy named Jeremy, went missing. We were supposed to meet at the main lodge after free time, but Jeremy never showed up. We searched the camp, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. Panic set in quickly. Eleanor called the local authorities, and we organized search parties to comb through the woods. It was late afternoon when we found him, or rather, what was left of him. His body was lying in a small clearing, about half a mile from the camp, hidden under a layer of leaves and branches. The scene was gruesome, something out of a nightmare. His clothes were torn, and there were deep gashes all over his body. It looked like he had been attacked by an animal, but there was something too precise, too deliberate about the wound. We were all in shock. The camp was immediately shut down, the kids sent home. While the police investigated, they interviewed all of us, but none of us had seen anything unusual except for me. I told them about the man I had seen, but without more evidence, there wasn't much They could do. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation seemed to stall. I went back home, but the memories of that summer haunted me. I couldn't stop thinking about Jeremy and the look of terror frozen on his face. I started digging into the camp's history, trying to find any clue that might explain what had happened. What I found was chilling. There had been other incidents at Camp Willow Creek dating back decades. Campers and counselors going missing, bodies found mutilated in the woods. It wasn't common knowledge buried in old newspaper archives and forgotten records. The authorities had always chalked it up to animal attacks or accidents, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. I reached out to Eleanor, hoping she might have some answers. She was reluctant to talk at first, but eventually she agreed to meet me. We met at a small cafe in town, and I could see the toll the past weeks had taken on her. She looked exhausted, her eyes hollow and haunted. "Why didn't you tell us about the other incidents?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Eleanor sighed, rubbing her temples, because I didn't want to believe it was happening again. We thought we had put a stop to it years ago. I leaned in, my heart pounding. She hesitated, then began to tell me a story that made my blood run cold. Back in the late 80s, there had been a series of similar attacks at the camp. They had eventually traced it back to a local man, a recluse, who lived in the woods. He had been killing campers, believing they were trespassing on his land. The police had arrested him, but he had escaped custody and vanished. They assumed he had died in the woods, but the attacks had stopped, so they closed the case. But what if he didn't die? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ella shook her head. "I don't know, but it seems like someone or something is following in his footsteps." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. The man I had seen, could he be the same one, or perhaps a relative? The thought was terrifying, but it made too much sense. The precision of the attacks, the deliberate nature of the wounds, it all pointed to a human hand, and I decided I couldn't let this go. I had to find out the truth, not just for Jeremy, but for all the victims over the years. I convinced Todd to come back with me to Camp Willow Creek. We planned to do some investigating on our own, hoping to find something the police had missed. We arrived at the camp just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the deserted grounds. The place felt different now, its once welcoming atmosphere replaced by an oppressive silence. We made our way to the main lodge, setting up our gear and preparing for a long night. As darkness fell, we began our search, starting with the area where Jeremy's body had been found. We moved slowly, methodically, our flashlights cutting through the thick underbrush. Hours passed with nothing to show for our efforts, and I could feel the frustration building. Then, just as we were about to call it a night, we heard a faint rustling in the bushes. We froze, our flashlights converging on the source of the sound. Slowly we approached, our hearts pounding in our chests. As we drew closer, we saw a figure emerge from the shadows. It was Episode 12. Him, the same man I had seen weeks ago. His clothes were even more tattered, his beard wilder, his eyes filled with a manic intensity. He stood there watching us, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He didn't answer, just kept smiling as he took a step towards us. That's when I saw the knife in his hand glinting in the moonlight. Panic surged through me, but I knew we couldn't run. We had to confront him, end this once and for all. Todd and I spread out, trying to flank him. He lunged at me, the knife flashing through the air. I dodged, feeling the blade graze my arm. Todd tackled him from behind, and the three of us went down in a tangle of limbs. The man was stronger than he looked, and he fought with a feral intensity in the struggle. I managed to grab a rock, bringing it down on his head. He grunted, momentarily stunned, and we managed to wrestle the knife away. Todd pinned him to the ground as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The police arrived within minutes, taking the man into custody. He was barely conscious, his head bleeding from the blow. As they hauled him away, couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, mixed with lingering dread. We had stopped him, but at what cost? The aftermath was a blur of police interviews and media attention. They confirmed that the man was indeed the same one who had escaped custody years ago, living in the woods and continuing his gruesome work. The camp was shut down indefinitely, and the story became a local legend, a cautionary tale for anyone who ventured too far into the wilderness. I went back to my life, but the events of that summer never left me. I still think about Jeremy and the other victims and the horrors they must have faced. It's a scar that will never fully heal, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk even in the most idyllic places. Years later, I still get together with Todd sometimes, and we talk about that summer. We laugh about the good times, the jokes and the friendships, but there's always a shadow over those memories, a piece of our past that refuses to fade. And every time I hear a rustle in the bushes or see a shadow out of the corner of my eye, I can't help but feel a chill, wondering if there are still secrets hidden in the woods waiting to be uncovered. But the story doesn't end there. The events at Camp Willow Creek set in motion a series of investigations that would uncover a dark history spanning decades. As news of the killers' capture spread, more people came forward with their own stories of strange encounters and unexplained disappearances in the area. Local historian Maria Sanchez began compiling these accounts, piecing together a troubling pattern that stretched back to the camp's founding in the 1960s. She discovered that the land where Camp Willow Creek stood at once belonged to a reclusive family with a reputation for violence and strange beliefs. The family had been forced off their land when the camp was established, but rumors persisted that some of them had remained in the surrounding woods, nurturing a deep-seated hatred for the invaders who had taken their home. As I delved deeper into Maria's research, I found myself drawn back into the mystery. Todd and I spent countless hours poring over old records, interviewing locals, and exploring the dense forest around the camp. We learned that the man we had caught, whose name we now knew was Frank Holbrook, was just one piece of a larger, more terrifying puzzle. Frank, it turned out, was the grandson of the original landowners. He had grown up on stories of his family's lost heritage and had taken it upon himself to reclaim what he saw as rightfully his. But he wasn't alone in his crusade. We uncovered evidence of a small group of individuals, all descendants of the original family, who had been living off the grid in the wilderness for years. They had created their own twisted society, passing down their hatred and violent tendencies from generation to generation. This Revelation shed new light on the sporadic nature of the attacks over the years. It wasn't just one man, but a group, working together, striking when the opportunity arose, and then retreating. Back into the wild, the police launched a massive operation to locate and apprehend the remaining members of this group. For weeks, the forests around Camp Willow Creek were combed by search parties and tracking dogs. Slowly, they began to find evidence of long-term habitation, makeshift shelters, crew tools, and eventually the people themselves. The arrests made national headlines. The story of a hidden clan of killers living in the Montana wilderness captured the public imagination. There were talks of books and movies, but for those of us who had lived through it, the reality was far from entertaining. As the full extent of their crimes came to light, the horror of what had happened at Camp Willow Creek only deepened. The group had been responsible for dozens of deaths over the years, not just at the camp, but throughout the surrounding area. They had developed their own twisted rituals and beliefs, seeing themselves as the rightful guardians of the land, tasked with driving out all trespassers. The trials that followed were a media circus. I was called to testify, recounting my experiences that summer and the investigation that followed. Sitting in the witness box, facing Frank and the others, I was struck by the emptiness in their eyes. There was no remorse, no recognition of the lives they had destroyed. They truly believed they were justified. Episode 13. In their actions, in the injustice was served, at least in the eyes of the law. Frank and his cohorts were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The forests around Camp Willow Creek were thoroughly searched, and authorities were confident that all members of the group had been apprehended. But for me, Todd, and the others who had lived through those terrifying events, the scars remained. The camp was eventually bulldozed, the land reclaimed by nature. A memorial was erected for the victims, a somber reminder of the lives lost to senseless violence. Years have passed since then, but the memories haven't faded. I still have nightmares about that summer, about the man in the woods and the horrors we uncovered. I've tried to move on, to build a life that isn't defined by those events, but it's not easy. I became a child psychologist, hoping to help kids who've been through traumatic experiences. Every day I see the long-lasting effects of violence and fear on young minds, and it reminds me of Jeremy and the other children who never got the chance to heal. Todd went into law enforcement, driven by a need to protect others from the kind of evil we encountered. We still meet up regularly, bound by a shared experience that few others can understand. Our conversations often drift back to that summer, analyzing and reanalyzing every detail, as if we might find some new insight that could make sense of it all. Sometimes late at night, I find myself wondering if we really did uncover the whole truth. Are there still secrets hidden in those woods? Are there others out there, indoctrinated into that twisted ideology, waiting for their chance to strike? I try to push these thoughts away, to focus on the good I can do in the present, but I can't help it. Feel that my experience at Camp Willow Creek has forever changed me, forever connected me to a dark chapter in history that most people will never fully understand. As I sit here, 66 years old, and looking back on that fateful summer, I realized that the events at Camp Willow Creek didn't just change me, They shaped the course of my entire life. The horror we experienced there cast a long shadow, influencing every decision, every relationship, every moment of peace or anxiety in the decades that followed. The nightmares have lessened over the years, but they never truly went away. There are still nights when I wake up in a cold sweat, the image of Frank's twisted smile or Jeremy's broken body fresh in my mind. On those nights, I find myself reaching for the phone, dialing Todd's number before I even realize what I'm doing. Todd and I have remained close over the years, bound by a shared trauma that no one else can fully understand. He retired from the police force a few years ago, but old habits die hard. He still keeps tabs on any unusual occurrences in the area around the old campsite, always vigilant, always prepared for the worst. Last year, on the 20th anniversary of that terrible summer, Todd and I decided to return to the site of Camp Willow Creek. The memorial for the victims still stands, a somber granite obelisk in a small clearing. The forest has reclaimed much of the land, erasing almost all traces of the camp that once stood there. As we stood there paying our respects to Jeremy and the others who lost their lives, I felt a chill run down my spine. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a figure watching us from the tree line, a tall, gaunt silhouette with a wild beard. I blinked and it was gone. Did you see that? I asked Todd, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded grimly, his hand instinctively moving to where his service weapon used to be. Probably just a DA here, he said, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. We spent the rest of the day combing through the surrounding woods, looking for any sign of human presence. We found nothing concrete, just a few oddly arranged stones that could have been natural formations or could have been left by human hands. It was enough to leave us unsettled, to reignite that spark of fear and doubt that had never fully extinguished. On the drive back home, Todd and I had a long, serious conversation. Asian. We discussed the possibility that we had missed something all those years ago, that there could be more to the story than we knew. We talked about going to the authorities, about launching a new investigation, but in the end, we decided against it. Without concrete evidence, it would just be the ramblings of two old men unable to let go of the past. But we made a pact that day. We agreed to stay vigilant, to keep our eyes and ears open for any sign that the horrors of Camp Willow Creek might be stirring once again. We set up a network of contacts in the area: forest rangers, local law enforcement, even some of the more level-headed cryptid hunters who frequent the region. If anything unusual happens in those woods, we'll know about it. It's been a year since that visit, and so far things have remained quiet, but I can't shake the feeling that this story isn't over yet. Maybe it's just paranoia, the lasting effects of trauma and age playing tricks on my mind, or maybe there's something out there in those woods waiting, watching, biting. It's time I've started writing everything down, creating a record of all that happened and all that we've learned. Since this account you're reading now is part of that effort, if anything should happen to me or Todd, if the horrors of Camp Willow Creek should ever resurface, I want there to be a record. I want someone to know the truth. To anyone reading episode 14, this, I implore you, stay vigilant. The world is full of dark corners where evil can take root and grow. What happened at Camp Willow Creek could happen again, anywhere, at any time. It's up to us, all of us, to remain aware, to protect the innocent and to shine a light into those dark corners. As for me, I'll continue my work as a child, psychologist helping young minds heal from trauma and fear. It's my way of honoring Jeremy and all the other victims of trying to bring some good out of all the horror we experienced. And every so often, when the nights grow long and the shadows seem to creep closer, I'll find myself looking out the window towards the distant mountains where Camp Willow Creek once stood. I'll remember that summer, the lives lost the evil we faced, and I'll remind myself that the greatest weapon against such darkness is to never forget, to never stop fighting, and to never lose hope that good can triumph over evil. The story of Camp Willow Creek may be over, but its lessons and its warnings will live on through me, through Todd, and now through you. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the most idyllic places can hide the darkest secrets. My name is Charles Smith. What I'm about to tell you happened to me back in 1999, when I was just 17. It was a summer that changed my life forever, a summer that still haunts my dreams even after all. These years, I remember it like it was yesterday, the excitement bubbling in my chest as I stepped off the bus at the entrance to Camp Whispering Pines. The smell of pine needles and damp earth filled my nostrils, a welcome change from the city's pollution. I hefted my duffel bag over my shoulder, gazing up at the towering trees that seemed to whisper secrets to each other in the gentle breeze. I was here as a first-time camp counselor, eager to earn money for college and escape the stifling heat of the city for a summer. Little did I know that this idyllic forest setting would become the backdrop for the most terrifying experience of my life. The camp director, a portly man named Frank Holloway, greeted me with a firm handshake. "Welcome to Camp Whispering Pines, Charles," he said, his voice gruff but friendly. "We're glad to have you on board. Let's get you settled in and introduce you to the rest of the team." As we walked towards the main lodge, Frank filled me in on the camp's history. Camp Whispering Pines has been around since the 1950s, he explained. We've had our ups and downs over the years, but we've always managed to bounce back. This summer is looking to be one of our best. Yet I nodded, taking in the rustic charm of the place. The main lodge was a large, 2-story log cabin with a wide porch, and rocking chairs surrounding it were smaller cabins, presumably for the campers. In the distance, I could see a shimmering lake, its surface reflecting the late afternoon sun inside the lodge. I met the other counselors who had arrived early to help prepare for the campers' arrival. There was Cliff, our head counselor, a burly guy with a booming laugh that seemed to shake the rafters. Vanessa, a nonsense girl from Boston, sized me up with a critical eye before offering a curt nod. Leo, a quiet guy with shaggy hair and a guitar case slung over his shoulder, gave me a shy wave. And then there was Katar, a Russian exchange student with an infectious smile that made my heart skip a beat. "All right, team," Frank said, clapping his hands. "Together, you've got a week to get this place ship shaped before the kids arrive. Cliff will assign your duties. Remember, we're here to create a safe, fun environment for these kids. Some of them have never been away from home before, so let's make sure they have a summer to remember." As Frank left us to our tasks, I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. This was going to be a great summer. I thought, little did I know how wrong I was. The week before the campers Arrived past in a blur of activity. We cleaned cabins, repaired equipment, and stocked supplies in the evenings. We'd gather around the campfire, sharing stories and getting to know each other. Better it was, during one of these nights, that Cliff told us about the camp's dark history, he said, his voice low and serious. There's an old legend about this place. We all leaned in, eager to hear more. Years ago, there was a handyman who worked here named Sam. They say he went crazy one summer and disappeared into the woods. Some folks reckon he's still out there roaming the forest, looking for campers to take a chill. Ran down my spine despite the warmth of the fire. I looked around at the others, trying to gauge their reactions, but the Cenobento Vanessa scoffed, clearly unimpressed. Leo shifted uncomfortably, while Kater's eyes were wide with a mix of fear and fascination. That's just a story to scare the kids, right? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Cliff shrugged, the fur light casting eerie shadows across his face. Maybe, but strange things have happened in these woods over the years. Best to keep your wits about you. The conversation moved on to lighter topics, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my gut that night. As I lay in my bunk, I found myself straining to hear any unusual sounds from the surrounding forest. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell into a fitful sleep. The next few days passed without incident, and soon enough, the campers arrived. The camp came alive with the sound of children's laughter and the bustle of activities. I was assigned to a group of 12-year-old boys, and I threw myself into my role as their counselor. We went. Episode 15. Hiking, learned to build fires, and spent hours by the lake, fishing and swimming. It wasn't until the third week that things started to get weird. At first, it was just little things. Tools would go missing from the shed, only to turn up in odd places. Days later, food disappeared from the kitchen at an alarming rate, more than could be explained. By midnight, snacking one night, as I was doing a final check of the cabins, I heard a rustling in the bushes behind the dining hall. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously approached the source of the noise. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and undergrowth. I was about to turn back when I saw it, a shadowy figure darting between the trees. My heart raced as I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" But there was no response, only the sound of receding footsteps crunching through the underbrush. I reported the incident to Cliff the next morning, but he brushed it off. "Probably just a deer," he said, but I could see a flicker of concern in his eyes. As the days went by, more strange occurrences piled up. Campers reported hearing whispers in the night when everyone was supposed to be asleep. Objects would move seemingly on their own, and always there was the feeling of being watched, especially when we ventured into the deeper parts of the forest. The other counselors were starting to notice too. Vanessa's usual bravado was slipping, replaced by a nervous energy. Leo spent more time than ever with his guitar, as if the music could ward off the growing sense of unease. And Katja Katata seemed to be withdrawing into herself, her bright smile appearing less frequently. I tried to rationalize it all. We were in the woods, after all. Strange noises and movements were to be expected, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. The legend of Sam the handyman kept creeping back into my thoughts. No matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, little did I know these were just the first signs of the horror that was about to unfold at Camp L. Whispering. Pines. It was a Tuesday night when everything changed. I remember because we had just finished the weekly campfire sing-along and the kids were heading back to their cabins, still giggling and chattering about the silly songs and skits. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and roasted marshmallows, and a nearly full moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows. Across the camp, Katata and I were on night duty, making sure all the campers were settled in their bunks. We had just finished our rounds and were heading back to the counselor's cabin when we heard it, a blood-curdling scream that shattered the peaceful night. We looked at each other for a split second before breaking into a run towards the source of the sound. It seemed to be coming from Cabin 7, where some of the younger boys were staying. As we approached, we could hear panicked voices and the sound of someone crying. I burst through the door, Kia right behind me. The scene inside was chaos. Kids were huddled on their bunks, wide-eyed with fear. In the center of the room stood Jeremy, one of the 8-year-old's, tears streaming down his face. To Timmy, he stammered when he saw us. Timmy's gone. My blood ran cold. What do you mean gone? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm for the sake of the frightened children. He was right there. Jeremy pointed to an empty bottom bunk. We were talking, and then I fell asleep. When I woke up just now, he wasn't there. I thought maybe he went to the bathroom. But then I saw. What did you see? Jeremy, Katya asked gently, kneeling down beside the boy. Jeremy's lower lip trembled. There was a man standing right there by the window. He was looking at me, and then he just disappeared. I exchanged a worried glance with Katata. Okay, everyone, stay calm. I said, my mind racing. Katata, can you stay here with the boys? I'm going to get Cliff and the others. We'll find Timmy. Don't worry. I sprinted to the counselor's cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. This couldn't be happening. Kids didn't just vanish into thin air, and that man Jeremy saw, could it be? No, I told myself it was just a story. It had to be. I burst into the cabin, startling Cliff and the others who were playing cards. Timmy's missing. I gasped out, we need to search the camp now. Cliff's face turned grave. He immediately took charge, organizing us into search parties. Charles, you and Leo take the east side of the camp. Vanessa and I will cover the west. Frank gone into town for supplies, so we'll have to handle this ourselves. For now, keep your radios on at all times. If you find anything at all that you call it in immediately. Got it. We all nodded, the severity of the situation sinking in as we headed out into the night, flashlights in hand. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something far more sinister than a simple case of a wandering child. Leo and I searched for hours, calling Timmy's name until our voices were hoarse. We checked every building, every bush, every shadowy corner of the camp, but there was no sign of the boy. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, we regrouped at the main lodge, exhausted and disheartened. Nothing, Cliff said, his usual booming voice subdued. Not a goddamn trace. What do we do now, Vanessa asked, her tough exterior cracking to reveal genuine fear. Cliff ran a hand over his face. We have to call the authorities and the boys' parents. God, how am I going to tell them? As Cliff went to make the difficult phone calls, the rest of us sat in stunned silence. The enormity of what had happened was episode 16. starting to sink in. A child had vanished under our watch, and worse, we had no idea how or why. I thought back to Jeremy's words about the man he'd seen. Could it have been Sam the legendary handyman? But that was impossible. It was just a campfire story, wasn't it yet? As I looked at the haunted expressions on my fellow counselors' faces, I knew we were all thinking the same thing. Something evil had come to Camp Whispering Pines, and Timmy was only the beginning. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, search parties, and frantic parents arriving to collect their children. The camp was in chaos, with rumors flying and fear palpable in the air. The police seemed skeptical of our accounts, especially when we mentioned the strange occurrences leading up to Timmy's disappearance. I could see the doubt in their eyes as we told them about the missing tools, the shadowy figure in the woods, and Jeremy's sighting of the mysterious man. "Look, one of the detectives," said, his voice tinged with frustration. "We understand you're all shaken up, but we need to focus on the facts. A young boy is missing. That's our priority right now." But as the day stretched on with no sign of Timmy even, the police began to look rattled. They brought in dogs to search the woods, but the animals would get to a certain point and then whine and refuse to go. Further divers searched the lake but found nothing. It was as if Timmy had simply vanished into thin air. The camp population dwindled as more and more parents arrived to take their children home. Those who remained were subdued, jumping at shadows and huddling together. In groups, we counselors did our best to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but it was a losing battle. One evening, about a week after Timmy's disappearance, I found myself sitting by the lake, unable to sleep. The moon reflected off the still water, creating an almost ethereal scene that belied the darkness that had settled over the camp. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Cliff approaching. He sat down heavily beside me, his face etched with worry. For a long moment we sat in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. Then Cliff spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't the first time, you know." I turned to look at him, a chill running down my spine. "What do you mean?" Cliff sighed, suddenly looking much older than his years, back in the 80s, before my time. Here 2 kids disappeared just like Timmy. They never found them. The camp closed down for a few years after that. I felt a surge of anger. "Why didn't you tell us this before we had a right to?" No. Cliff met my gaze, his eyes filled with regret. "Would you have taken the job if you knew? Would any of us?" Frank thought we thought it was in the past, that it couldn't happen again. I wanted to yell at him, to blame him for what had happened, but the defeated slump of his shoulders stopped me. He was carrying this burden, had been carrying it all along. "What happened back then?" I asked instead. "Do you know?" Cliff shook his head. "Not really, Frank doesn't like to talk about it. All I know is that it happened around the same time that Sam, the handyman, disappeared." The mention of Sam sent a shiver through me. "Do you think, could the stories about him be true?" Before Cliff could answer, we heard a scream from the direction of the cabins. We jumped to our feet and ran towards the sound. Our conversation forgotten in the face of a new crisis. As we approached the counselor's cabin, we saw Vanessa stumbling out the door, her face pale as a ghost. "There's someone in there," she gasped, pointing back inside. Cliff pushed past her into the cabin. With me close behind, the interior was dark, but in the dim light filtering through Through the windows, I could make out a figure standing in the corner. It was tall and gaunt, with wild matted hair and clothes that hung in tatters. For a moment, time seemed to stand still then. The figure moved faster than seemed possible. It lunged towards us, and I caught a glimpse of mad feral eyes and teeth bared in a snarl. Cliff shoved me backwards out of the cabin and slammed the door shut. "Run," he yelled. "Get to the main lodge and call the police." I hesitated for a split second, not wanting to leave Cliff alone with whatever that thing was. But then I heard the sound of breaking glass from inside the cabin, and my survival instinct kicked in. I grabbed Vanessa's arm and we ran, our feet pounding against the dirt path. As we reached the main lodge, I risked a glance back. What I saw made my blood run cold. The figure from the cabin was outside now, silhouetted against the moonlight, and it was coming after us. We burst into the main lodge, slamming the door behind us. Vanessa's hands shook as she fumbled with the lock, while I ran to the phone. As I dialed 911, I could hear scratching at the door like an animal trying to claw its way in 911. "What's your emergency?" The operator's calm voice seemed surreal in contrast to the panic coursing through my veins. "We need help at Camp Whispering Pines." I gasped out. "There's something. Here, it's attacking us. Please send someone quick." As I gave them the details, I heard a crash from outside. Vanessa let out a strangled cry. "The window, it's trying to get in through the window." I dropped the phone and rushed to Vanessa. Side through the window, I could see a dark shape moving, trying to force its way in. The glass cracked under the pressure spiderweb pattern spreading across its surface. "We need to barricade ourselves in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Help me move this bookcase." Together, we pushed the heavy Episode 17 wooden bookcase in front of the window. It wouldn't hold for long, but it might buy us some time. We could hear sirens in the distance growing louder. Help was coming, but would it be soon enough? Suddenly, the scratching and pounding stopped. An eerie silence fell over the lodge. Vanessa and I exchanged a look of confusion and terror. Had it given up, or was it just waiting for us to let our guard down? Then we heard it, a low, guttural laugh coming from outside. It didn't sound human. It was the kind of laugh that sends chills down your spine and makes your blood run cold. "Charles," Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening? What is that thing?" Before I could answer, the door to the lodge burst open. We both screamed, expecting to see the monstrous figure. Instead, it was Katata, her eyes wide with panic. "Cliff," she gasped. "It's got Cliff." My heart sank. "What, where?" "By the lake." Katya said. "I saw it dragging him towards them." "Light and the water. We have to help him." I hesitated. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stay put, to wait for the police. But Cliff had saved my life. Back at the cabin, I couldn't abandon him. "No, okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Vanessa, you stay here. When the police arrive, tell them where we've gone." "Katya, show me where you saw them." Vanessa nodded, her face pale but determined. Katya and I slipped out of the lodge and into the night. The moon had disappeared behind a bank of clouds, plunging the camp into near total darkness. We moved as quickly and quietly as we could towards the lake, every snapping twig and rustling leaf making us jump. As we neared the shore, I could make out two figures in the gloom. One was on the ground, not moving. The other was hunched over it, doing something. I felt bile rise in my throat. Cliff, I called out, hoping, against hope, that he was still alive. The hunched figure straightened and turned towards us in the dim light. I could finally see it. Clearly it was a man, or what was left of a man. His skin was pale and mottled, his hair wild and matted with leaves and twigs. His clothes hung in tatters, revealing a body that was unnaturally thin. But it was his eyes that truly terrified me. They glowed with an inhuman, feral intelligence. Sam Thai whispered the name escaping my lips. Before I could stop it, the creature, for I couldn't think of it as a man anymore, grinned, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. You shouldn't have come. Back it rasped, its voice like dead leaves scraping across stone. It started moving towards us with unnatural speed. I grabbed Katya's hand and yelled, "Run!" We tore through the woods. Branches was whipping at our faces. I could hear it behind us, getting closer. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but terror kept me going. Suddenly, Katya's hand was torn from mine. I spun around to see her on the ground, Sam looming over her. Without thinking, I charged at him, tackling him to the ground. We rolled down a small embankment, grappling in the dirt. His strength was inhuman, and his nails raked across my skin, drawing blood. I fought with everything I had, knowing that if I lost, I would die here in these dark woods. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, a gunshot rang out. Sam's body jerked and he let out an inhuman howl. More shots followed and he finally released me, stumbling back into the shadows of the forest. I lay there, gasping for breath as flashlights swept. The area police officers swarmed around us, some pursuing Sam into the woods, others checking on me and Katya. "Are you all right, son?" a gruff voice asked. Looked up to see an older officer extending his hand to me. I took it, wincing as I got to my feet. "Cliff," I managed to say, "by the lake. He needs help." The officer nodded and barked orders to his men as they carried me to an ambulance. I caught a glimpse of them bringing a body bag up from the lake. Sure, I closed my eyes. A wave of grief washing over me. The next few days passed in a blur of hospital rooms and police interviews. They found Timmy's body in a cave deep in the woods, along with evidence of other victims from years past Sam's lair. They called it The Story. Made national news. The crazy hermit who had been living in the woods for decades, preying on campers. But those of us who had been there, who had seen Sam up close, knew there was more to it than that. There was something not quite human about him, something that defied rational explanation. Camp Whispering Pines was shut down permanently. The land was sold off to developers, the buildings torn down. It was as if everyone wanted to erase the memory of what had happened there. I went to college that fall, trying to move on with my life, but the memories haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sam's feral grin, heard Cliff's final scream. I wondered if there was something I could have done differently, something that could have saved them. Years passed. I built a life for myself, got married, had kids of my own, but I never took them. Camping, I never told them about that summer at Camp Whispering Pines. It wasn't until I was in my 50s that I finally reached out to the others. Leo had become a successful musician, his songs hinting at the darkness we had. Experienced Kaya was a counselor herself, now working with troubled youth. Vanessa had disappeared a few years after that summer, No one knew what had happened to her. We met at a small diner, the three of us who remained at first. We made awkward small talk dancing around the real reason we were there, but as the hours passed and the coffee grew cold, we began to talk about that summer. Episode 18. We talked about Cliff's bravery, about Timmy's infectious laugh. We talked about the fear, the confusion, the grief, and we talked about Sam, about the inexplicable evil we had encountered. Do you think it's really over? Carter asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Leo and I exchanged a look. We both knew the answer, even if we didn't want to admit it. I don't know, I said finally, but I do know. This what happened at Camp Whispering Pines. It changed us. It showed us that there are things in this world that we can't explain, things that lurk in the shadows of our comfortable lives. We sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in our own thoughts. Then Leo raised his coffee cup to survival, he said simply. Katata and I raised our cups as well to survival. We echoed. As I sit here now, an old man looking back on a long life, I can't help but think about that summer, about the thin line between our safe, rational world and the darkness that lurks just beyond, about how quickly everything we think we know can be turned upside down. I've never told this story before, not the whole truth of it, but I'm telling it now because I think it's important to remember that the world is stranger and more dangerous than we like to admit. Important to be prepared, to be vigilant, because sometimes the monsters aren't just stories we tell around the campfire. Sometimes they're real, and sometimes they're waiting for us in the Whispering Pines. My name is James Martinez. What I'm about to tell you happened to me back in 2003. When I was 24, it was a time when I thought I had the world figured out, a time when the shadows in the woods were just shadows and the monsters were confined to campfire stories. How wrong I was. I had just graduated with a degree in environmental science from the University of Vermont. The future stretched out before me, full of promise and potential. But before diving into the real world, I decided to take a summer job at Camp Pinewood in the Adara. You know the type, one of those picturesque places where you get lost in the trees and forget about the city. I needed the break, or at least I thought I did. I was never really the camp counselor type. My idea of communing with nature usually involved a well-marked trail and a comfortable bed waiting at the end of the day. But my buddy Trent had been working at Camp Pinewood for years and was now the head counselor. He promised it would be a breeze, a few months of hiking, swimming, and roasting marshmallows with a bunch of kids, plus it would look good on my resume showing I could handle responsibility and work with children. Little did I know that summer would change everything. The drive up to Camp Pinewood was beautiful. The roads wound through dense forests, occasionally offering glimpses of sparkling lakes and towering mountains. As I pulled into the camp's gravel driveway, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The main lodge was a large, rustic building with a wide porch and a sign that read, "Welcome to Camp Pinewood," in faded red letters. Trent was waiting for me on the porch, his familiar grin, a welcome sight. He hadn't changed much since college, still tall and lanky with a mop of curly brown hair and a perpetual tan. "James, you made it," he called out, bounding down the steps to greet me. "How was the drive?" "Not bad," I replied, stretching as I got out of the car. "Beautiful country up Here, Trent helped me with my bags, chatting away about the upcoming summer. We've got a great group of kids coming. In this year, you'll be in charge of Cabin 710. Yeah, olds, they're a good bunch, just full of energy. As we walked towards the cabins, I took in my surroundings. The camp was nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. A path led down to a large lake that shimmered in the afternoon sun. Various activity areas were scattered around an archery, ranger ropes course, and several fire pits for evening gatherings. This is you, Trent said, stopping in front of a small wooden cabin. It was simple but cozy looking, with a small porch and 2 windows. Get settled in. Orientation for the new counselors starts in an hour. As Trent walked away, I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The air was fresh and clean, filled with the scent of pine. Birds chirped in the distance and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. It was peaceful, idyllic, even, but there was something else. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on, a feeling barely perceptible, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. I shook it off, chalking it up to nerves about the new job. Little did I know that feeling was the first whisper of the horror that was to come. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The campers arrived, a noisy, excited bunch of kids ranging from 8 to 15 years old. My group, the 10-year-olds of Cabin 7, were a lively bunch. There was Mike, the unofficial leader of the group, always ready with a joke or a dare. Sarah, the quiet bookworm, who nevertheless had a mischievous streak. Timmy, the smallest of the group, wide-eyed and eager to please. And then there was Danny, a sullen boy who seemed to resent being there. Our days quickly fell into routine. Morning started with a bell ringing through the cool, crisp air. The kids would groan and moan, but eventually they'd get up and we'd all head to the mess hall for breakfast. The food was typical camp fare: pancakes, eggs and bacon with fruit for those who wanted it after breakfast. We'd split up for morning activities. Some days we'd go hiking, exploring the trails around the camp. Other days we'd head down to the lake for swimming. And episode 19, canoeing. The afternoons were filled with more structured activities, arts and craft, sports, nature studies. Despite my initial reservations, I found myself enjoying the work. There was something rewarding about seeing the kids learn new skills, overcome fears and form friendships. Even Danny, the sullen one, began to open up as the days went by, but there was always this weird vibe about the place, especially at night after the kids had gone to bed. I'd often sit outside my cabin, enjoying the quiet. The stars were incredible out there. Away from the city lights, the Milky Way stretched across the sky, a river of light amid the darkness. It was during one of these quiet moments, about a week into the camp, that I first heard it, an odd noise coming from deeper in the forest. It wasn't any animal I could recognize, more like a scraping sound, like metal on metal. I sat up straighter, straining my ears, but as quickly as it had come, the sound vanished, leaving only the normal nighttime noises of the forest. Probably some raccoon messing with a trash can, I thought, shrugging it off. But a small part of me wasn't so sure. That night, I had trouble falling asleep, the strange sound echoing in my mind. The next morning, as we were getting ready for breakfast, Timmy came up to me, his face scrunched up with worry. "Mr. Martinez," he said, "I can't find my flashlight." I know I put it under my pillow last night, but now it's gone. I helped him look, but the flashlight was nowhere to be found. We'll find it, buddy. I reassured him, though. A little part of me wondered it wasn't like Timmy to be careless with his things. Over the next few days more, things went missing. Small stuff, but enough to get under our skin. Mike's pocket knife disappeared from his backpack. A few snacks vanished from Sarah's secret stash. Even one of the camp's walkie-talkies went missing from the main office I mentioned to Trent, but he brushed it off. Kids are always losing things, he said with a laugh. Remember how many socks you'd come home with out after summer camp? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The missing items, the strange sound in the night, it all added up to something, but I couldn't quite figure out what. As the first week drew to a close, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, scanning the tree line for something I couldn't explain, expert even to myself, but I felt like we were being watched. Little did I know this was just the beginning of the terror that would unfold at Camp Pinewood. The second week of camp started much like the first. The days were filled with activities, laughter, and the occasional homesick tears. But underneath it all, there was a growing sense of unease. More items had gone missing, a compass from the nature center, a few more flashlights, even some food from the mess hall kitchen. The kids were starting to notice too. Whispered conversations around the campfire at night, theories ranging from a mischievous raccoon to full-blown ghost. Stories I did my best to reassure them. But truth be told, I was starting to get spooked myself. It was on a Wednesday evening that things took a turn for the worse. I was leading a group of kids on a Naihaiki, something we did once a week, to teach them about nocturnal animals and star navigation. We were about a mile from Camp Flashlight, bobbing in the darkness, when Mike suddenly called out, "Mr. Martinez, look over there." I followed his pointing finger and saw a faint glow through the trees off to our right. It wasn't the direction of the camp, and as far as I knew, there weren't any other buildings in this part of the forest. "Let him check it out," Mike said already, starting to move in that direction. "Hold on," I said, grabbing his shoulder. "We should stick to the trail." But curiosity got the better of me, and after a moment's hesitation, I decided to investigate. "Okay, we'll take a quick look, but stay close together." We made our way through the underbrush, the strange glow growing brighter as we approached. Suddenly, we stumbled into a small clearing I hadn't seen before. The source of the light became clear. It was moonlight reflecting off the metal of an old rusted-out car, half buried in the underbrush. The kids were intrigued, crowding around the vehicle. It was an old model, maybe from the 60s or 70s. Its once bright paint, now a dull, flaking red. Vines and moss had started to reclaim it, nature slowly erasing this intrusion, but something about it made my skin crawl. Why was it here in the middle of the forest, and why hadn't I noticed this clearing before? As I shone my flashlight over the car, something caught my eye. There on the ground, near the driver's side door, was a small object. I bent down to get a closer look, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Timmy's missing flashlight. "All right, everyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's getting late. Let's head back to camp." The kids groaned, but followed my lead as we walked back. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle in the bushes, every snapping twig made me jump when we got back to Camp Y, pulled Trent aside and told him about the car in the flashlight. He frowned, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by concern. That's odd, he said slowly. I've been coming to this camp for years and I've never seen or heard about any abandoned car in the woods. Should we call the sheriff? I asked Trent, thought for a moment, then shook his head. Not yet. It's probably nothing. Maybe some old junk car that's been there for years. And Timmy just dropped his flashlight there. Episode 20. During a previous hike, let's keep an eye on things for now. No need to alarm the kids or their parents over what might be. Nothing. I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about that car. What was it doing there, and why? Did I have the nagging feeling that it hadn't been there before? Little did I know that rusted out car in the clearing was just the first piece of a terrifying puzzle that was about to unfold. The discovery of the car and Timmy's flashlight haunted me for the next few days. I found myself distracted during activities, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line the kids picked up on my unease, becoming more subdued themselves. Even the usually boisterous Mike was quieter than normal. I debated whether to go back to the clearing alone to investigate further, but something held me back. Fear, uncertainty. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the image of that rusted out car, half swallowed by the forest, kept appearing in my mind. It was Saturday night when things escalated. We had just finished our weekly campfire, complete with s'mores and ghost stories, as the kids shuffled off to their cabins. Yawning and sticky with marshmallow reiki, decided to do one last perimeter check before turning. In the night was clear and cool, a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. The moon was nearly full, casting long shadows across the camp as I walked the grounds, my flashlight sweeping back and forth. I found myself drawn toward the path that led to the clearing. I hesitated at the edge of the camp, the dark forest looming before me. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to turn back, to return to the safety of my cabin, but something stronger, a mix of curiosity and dread, propelled me forward. The forest was eerily quiet as I made my way down the path. No chirping crickets, no hooting owls, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my feet. When I reached the clearing, the car was still there, a dark silhouette in the moonlight, but something was different. The driver's side door, which had been closed before, was now ajar, my heart pounding. I approached the vehicle. The beam of my flashlight revealed the interior, tattered seats, a rusted steering wheel, and a strong, musty smell. But what caught my eye were the drag marks in the dirt leading away from the car and deeper into the woods. I should have turned back then, should have run straight to Trent's cabin and called the sheriff, but I didn't. Instead, I followed the marks, my curiosity overriding my common sense. The trail led me through dense underbrush, branches scratching at my arms and face. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, I emerged into another small clearing, and there in the center stood a cabin. It was a small, dilapidated structure, its wood weathered and grey. Broken window reflected the moonlight, and the porch sagged dangerously, but what drew my attention was the faint, flickering light coming from inside. I crept closer, my heart thundering in my chest. As I approached the window, I could hear a low mumbling coming from inside. Slowly, carefully, I peered through the grimy glass. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. A man was hunched over a table, his back to me. He was tall and gaunt with long matted hair, but it was what was on the table that horrified me. Spread out before him were all the missing items from camp: flashlights, pocket knives, even the walkie-talkie, and among them, disturbingly, were photos. Photos of the camp, of the kids, of us, counselors. I must have made a sound, gasp, or a sharp intake of breath, because suddenly the man stiffened. He turned, slowly, and I found myself staring into the most terrifying face I'd ever seen. His eyes were wild, sunken deep into a gaunt face that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. A scraggly beard covered his lower face, and his teeth, visible in a snarl, were yellow and broken. But it was the look in his eyes that truly terrified me, a mixture of rage and hunger that wasn't entirely human. He saw me and let out a guttural growl, reaching for something on the table. I caught a glint of metal, a knife. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I turned and ran crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I could hear him behind me, his heavy breathing and the snap of twigs under his feet. But fear lent me speed, and somehow I made it back to camp. I burst into Trent's cabin, gasping for breath, my clothes torn and dirty. Trent sat up in the bed, startled awake by my entrance. "James, what the hell?" Between gulps of air, I managed to tell him everything. The car, the cabin, the man. At first he looked at me like I was crazy, but as I described the stolen items and the photos, his expression changed to one of grim concern. "We need to call the sheriff," he said, reaching for his phone now as Trent made the call. I sank onto his bed, my legs weak and shaky. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me feeling drained and terrified. What had I stumbled upon? And more importantly, what danger had I brought back to the camp? Little did I know the true horror was yet to come. The next few hours passed in a blur. The sheriff, a burly man named Tom Hawkins, arrived with 2 deputies. Just as the sky was beginning to lighten, they took my statement, their faces growing increasingly grim as I recounted my experience. "And you're sure about this?" Cabin Sheriff Hawkins asked, his thick eyebrows furrowed. I nodded, my throat dry. "Yes, I'm sure I know how it sounds, but..." Episode 21. Saw it with my own eyes. Sheriff Hawkins exchanged a look with his deputies. "All right," he said. "Finally, we'll check it out. But I want you two to stay here with the kids. Keep them close to the main buildings and don't let anyone wander off." As the sheriff and his men prepared to head into the woods, Trent and I gathered. The other counselors, we decided to keep the kids inside for the day, citing a special indoor activity day to avoid causing pain. It wasn't easy keeping a bunch of energetic kids cooped up, but under the circumstances, it was necessary. Hours passed with no word from the sheriff. The kids were getting restless, and so were we. I kept replaying the events of the night in my mind, second-guessing everything I'd seen. I imagined it all was the stress of the job getting to me. It was late afternoon when Sheriff Hawkins finally returned. The grim look on his face told me everything I needed to know even before he spoke. "We found the clearing in the car," he said, his voice low. "But there was no cabin." My heart sank. "That's impossible," I protested. "I saw it. It was right there." The sheriff held up a hand. "I believe you, saw something. We found drag marks, just like you described. And we found this. He held up an evidence bag containing a familiar object. Timmy's flashlight. There's more, he continued. We did a sweep of the area and found a campsite about a mile from where you said the cabin was. It had been recently abandoned, but we found some disturbing items. He didn't elaborate, but the look in his eyes sent a chill down my spine. I've called in additional deputies and a K9 unit, Sheriff Hawkins said. We're going to do a full search of the area. In the meantime, I want you to keep everyone here in the main camp area. No one goes into the woods for any reason. Understood. We nodded, the gravity of the situation settling over us like a heavy blanket. As the sheriff left to coordinate the search, Trent pulled me aside. James R., you sure about what you saw? I mean, really sure? I looked him in the eye. Trent, I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you there was a cabin and that man, he was real. I can still see his eyes. When I close mine, Trent nodded slowly. Okay, I believe you, but let's keep this between us for now. No need to scare the kids more than necessary. That night was one of the longest of my life. We kept the kids distracted with movies and games, but there was an undercurrent of tension that even they could sense. Every sound from the woods made me jump, imagining that wild-eyed man lurking just beyond the tree line. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The missing cabin, the abandoned campsite, the disturbing items the sheriff had mentioned, it all added up to something sinister. But what little did I know, that true horror was about to reveal itself, and it would change my life forever. The next few days passed in a haze of tension and forced normally. We kept the kids to the main camp areas coming up, with increasingly creative excuses for why we couldn't go hiking or canoeing. The police maintained a presence with deputies patrolling the perimeter of the camp. Their presence was both reassuring and unsettling, a constant reminder that danger lurked just beyond the tree line. Sheriff Hawkins kept us updated on the investigation. They had found more evidence of someone living rough in the woods, makeshift shelters, remnants of campfires, even some discarded food wrappers. But of the man I had seen there was no sign. It's like he's a ghost. The sheriff said, frustration evident in his voice. We've got tracks that just seem to vanish into thin air. As the days wore on, the initial fear began to fade, replaced by a sort of uneasy routine. The kids, resilient as ever, adapted to the new restrictions with only minimal grumbling, but there was a tension in the air, a feeling that something was about to break. It was on the 5th night after my encounter in the woods that it happened. I was doing my final rounds before bed, checking that all the cabin doors were locked. As I approached cabin 7, my cabin, I noticed something odd. The door was ajar, my heart racing. I called out, boys, everything okay in there? No answer. I pushed the door open slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The cabin looked normal at first glance, bunks with rumpled sleeping, bags, backpacks strewn about. But as I did a head count, my blood ran cold. Timmy was missing. I tore out of the cabin shouting for Trent, for the other counselors, for anyone. Within minutes, the entire camp was awake and a frantic search was underway. We scoured every building, every nook and cranny of the camp, calling Timmy's name, but deep down, I knew where he had gone, or rather, where he had been taken. Sheriff Hawkins arrived with more deputies in a K9 unit as they organized a search party to comb the woods. I pulled the sheriff aside. "I need to go with you," I said, my voice shaking, but determined. "I know those woods. I've seen where he might have taken Timmy." The sheriff looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you stay close." To me, no heroics understood. I nodded, relief and fear wearing in my chest as we set out into the dark woods, flashlights cutting through the gloom. I couldn't shake the image of Timmy, small, scared. Timmy in the hands of that wild-eyed man. The very thought made me sick to my stomach, but it also filled me with a determination I'd never felt. Before we moved through the forest, the dogs leading the way, their excited barks echoing episode 22. Through the trees, I led them to the clearing with the abandoned car, my heart pounding as we approached, but the clearing was empty, the car a silent sentinel in the moonlight, where now Sheriff Hawkins asked, his voice low and tense. I pointed deeper into the woods, towards where I had seen the cabin this way, but the cabin might not be there. It wasn't there when you looked before. The sheriff nodded grimly. "We'll find it. We have to." As we pushed further into the woods, the dogs suddenly went wild, barking and pulling at their leashes. And then, through the trees, I saw it. The cabin, it was there, just as I had seen it before. "There," I shouted, pointing. "That's it." Sheriff Hawkins pulled me back as his deputies moved forward, guns drawn. They approached the cabin, cautiously calling out for anyone inside to come out with their hands up. No response. With a nod from the sheriff, they breached the door. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. "Please let Timmy be okay," that I prayed silently. Moments later, a deputy emerged, his face pale. "Sheriff, you need to see this." Sheriff Hawkins turned to me. "Stay here," he ordered, before disappearing into the cabin. I stood there, rooted to the spot as minutes ticked by like hours. Finally, the sheriff emerged. The look on his face made my blood run cold. "James," he said, his voice heavy, "we found Timmy." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. "Is he?" I couldn't finish the question. "He's alive," the sheriff said, "but you better come see for yourself." With shaking legs, I followed Sheriff Hawkins into the cabin. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw inside. The interior was a nightmare come to life. The walls were covered with photos, hundreds of them, photos of kids from the camp, of counselors, of hikers and campers from who knows where. And in the center of it all, tied to a chair and gagged but mercifully unharmed, was Timmy as the deputies worked to untie him. I looked around the room in horror. On a table nearby, I saw piles of personal belongings, the missing items from camp, and so much more. Wallets, watches, phones, trophies taken from countless victims. But it was a book on the table that truly killed me to the bone. A leather-bound journal filled with names and dates, some of the names I recognized. Campers and counselors from years past. Others were strangers to me. But beside, many of the names were chilling notes, taken, escaped, disposed. As I flipped through the pages, with shaking hands, the full horror of what we had uncovered began to dawn on me. This wasn't just about a few stolen items or one kidnapped child. This was something much bigger, much more terrifying. We had stumbled upon the lair of a predator, someone who had been stalking these woods for years, taking Who knows how many victims, and he was still out there the next few hours. Past in a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices, more police arrived along, with FBI agents who took charge of the scene. Timmy was whisked away to a hospital, shaken, but miraculously physically unharmed. The camp was shut down immediately. Parents were called in the middle of the night to come and collect their children. The air was thick with fear and confusion as sleepy kids were bundled into cars, many of them not fully understanding what was happening. I sat on the steps of the main lodge, scratchy blanket around my shoulders, watching the chaos unfold. Trent sat beside me, his face pale and drawn. "I can't believe this," he murmured, shaking his head. "All these years, how did we not know?" I had no answer for him. The same question had been running through my mind all night. How had this monster operated for so long without being caught? How many lives had been destroyed in these woods while we sang campfire songs and roasted marshmallows as dawn broke, casting a surreal golden light over the camp? Sheriff Hawkins approached us. He looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. "We need to talk," he said, his voice grave. He led us to his car, away from the bustle of the crime scene. Once we were seated, he took a deep breath. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this car." "Understood." We nodded, bracing ourselves. "The man you saw, James, we think we know who he is. His name is Gerald Erickson. He was a counselor at this very camp back in the 80s. My mind reeled. How's that possible? The sheriff's face was grim. In 1985, 3 campers went missing during a night hike Erickson was leading. The hike, when questioned, he claimed they had wandered off, that he had searched for hours but couldn't find them there. Wasn't enough evidence to charge him, but, well, let's just say there were suspicions. "So he's been out here all this time?" Trent asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sheriff Hawkins nodded. "Looks like it, living off the grid. Hunting." He trailed off, but we all knew what he meant. "Hunting people will find him," the sheriff said a note of determination in his voice. "We've got roadblocks set up, state troopers and forest rangers joining the search. He can't hide forever." But as I looked out at the dense forest surrounding us, I wasn't so sure. Those woods suddenly seemed vast and impenetrable, full of shadows where a man could hide for years. The next few weeks were a nightmare of police interviews, press conferences, and sleepless nights. The story broke nationally. Summer camp predator's lair found in Adira. Reporters swarmed the area, hungry for any details about the campground. Killer Timmy thankfully recovered quickly, at least physically. In his statement to the police, he said he had been lured out of the cabin by a noise. Episode 23, then grabbed from behind. He didn't see his captor face, and he had been blindfolded until we found him in the cabin. As for me, I couldn't shake the image of that wild-eyed man in the cabin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him there, surrounded by his wall of trophies. The FBI psychologist said it was PTSD, prescribed me medication and therapy, but no pill could erase what I had seen, what I now knew about the darkness that could lurk in the hearts of men. Weeks turned into months. The search for Gerald Erickson continued, but as time passed, hope of finding him dwindled. Some speculated that he had fled the area, perhaps even the country. Others, remembering how he had evaded capture for so long, believed he was still out there in the woods, watching, waiting. I tried to move on with my life. I got a job in environmental conservation, working to protect the very forests that now filled me with dread. But a part of me remained there in those woods, forever changed by what I had experienced. Years have passed since that summer at Camp Pinewood. The camp never reopened. The land was eventually sold to the state and incorporated into the surrounding forest preserve. Timmy grew up, went to college, built a life for himself. We keep in touch. There's a bond between us that can never be broken, but every now and then I'll see a news report about a hiker gone missing in the Adara, or hear about strange sightings in the woods, and I'll wonder, is he still out there, still watching, still hunting? And on dark nights, when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I find myself listening for the sound of metal, scraping on metal, for heavy footsteps in the underbrush, listening for the echoes of a horror that I can never truly escape, because I know the truth that most people prefer to ignore sometimes. The monsters in our campfire stories are real, and sometimes they're closer than we ever dare to imagine. It's been over 2 decades since that fateful summer at Camp Pinewood, and still the memories haunt me. I've built a life for myself, good life with a loving family and a fulfilling career, but there's always a part of me that remains vigilant, always watching the shadows. Gerald Erickson was never found. The case went cold after a few years, joining the sad litany of unsolved mysteries that pepper the history of the Adara. But for those of us who lived through that summer, the story never truly ended. Timmy, now Tim, and I still meet up once a year, usually around the anniversary of his rescue. We don't talk much about what happened. We don't need to. The understanding between us goes deeper than words. Last year, as we sat in a quiet bar nursing our drinks, Tim suddenly spoke up. "You know, James, I've never thanked you properly," he said, his voice low, "for finding me that night, for everything." I shook my head. "You don't need to thank me, Tim. I just did what anyone would have done." He smiled sadly. "No, not anyone. You went back into those woods knowing what was out there. That takes a special kind of courage." We lapsed into silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Tim spoke again. "Do you ever wonder if he's still out there?" I didn't need to ask who he meant. Sometimes I admitted on bad nights. Tim nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Me too." As we parted ways that night, I found myself thinking about the nature of fear, of trauma, of the invisible scars we carry with us. The events of that summer changed me, changed all of us in ways both subtle and profound. But as I've grown older, I've come to realize something important. Yes, there is darkness in this world, capable of terrible things, but there is also light. There is courage and resilience, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the face of adversity. Gerald Erickson, the monster in the woods, sought to destroy lives and in many ways succeeded, but he also underestimated the human spirit. For every life he ruined, there were others who survived, who fought back, who refused to let the darkness win. As I write these words, I can look out my window and see the edge of the forest. Those trees that once filled me with such terror now seem different, still mysterious, still worthy of respect, but no longer the realm of nightmares they once were. I've come to understand that the real monsters aren't the shadows in the woods or the bumps in the night. The real monsters are the darkness that can live inside people, the capacity for cruelty that sometimes seems all too human, but I've also learned that this darkness isn't the whole story for every Gerald Erickson in the world. There are countless others who choose light over darkness, who rush to help rather than to harm. I think of the sheriff and his deputies tirelessly searching the woods. I think of Trent standing by me through the chaos. I think of Tim, who survived unimaginable terror and grew into a man of compassion and strength. And I think of myself not as a hero, but as someone who faced his fears and did what needed to be done. In doing so, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. Last month I received a letter. It was from a woman whose brother had gone missing in the Adara in the early 1990s. She had read about the Camp Pinewood case and the journal we found in Erickson's cabin. Her brother's name had been in that journal for years. We didn't know what happened to him, she wrote. It's a terrible thing to know now, but in a way, it's also a relief. At least we know, at least we can stop wondering. Her words struck a chord with me. They reminded me that even in the darkest stories there, episode 24 can be a kind of closure, a way forward. I've often wondered why I felt compelled to write down this story. After all these years, perhaps it's a way of exorcising the last of my demons, of finally putting the events of that summer to rest. Or perhaps it's a warning, a reminder that we must always be vigilant against the darkness, both in the world and in ourselves. But more than anything, I think it's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the light that can shine even in the deepest darkness. As I finish writing, the sun is setting, casting long shadows across my yard. In a few hours, night will fall and the forest will be cloaked in darkness, but I'm no longer afraid of what might be lurking in those shadows, because I know now that the most important battles aren't fought in dark woods or abandoned cabins. They're fought in the human heart, in the choices we make every day, to be kind, to be brave, to stand up for what's right. Gerald Erickson may still be out there somewhere, bogeyman haunting the edges of my memory, but he no longer has power over me. I've seen the F of true evil, and I've seen it defeated not by force, but by the simple, stubborn goodness of ordinary people doing the right thing. And in the end, that's the story I want to tell. Not just a tale of terror in the woods, but a reminder of the light that shines in all of us, a light that no matter how deep, the darkness can never truly be extinguished. As I close my notebook and I glance out the window one last time, the forest stands silent, a wall of shadows against the darkening sky. But for the first time in years, I feel no fear. Instead, I feel something else, hope, because I know now that no matter what lurks in the shadows, we have the power to face it, to fight it, to overcome it. And in that knowledge, I finally find peace